Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking the mind of Robert Kiyosaki, the legendary and, let's be real, pretty controversial force behind Rich Dad, Poor Dad. If you think you already know how money works, you might want to buckle up, because Kiyosaki's philosophies are designed to completely challenge absolutely everything we've been taught about wealth, school, and success. I love diving into topics exactly like this because it forces us to rethink our defaults. So let's map out exactly how he views the world. Here is our agenda for today. We're going to hit 5 key areas. First, choose your teachers wisely. Second, the new rules of money. Third, cash flow over everything. Fourth, the value of hard knocks. And finally, why business is a team sport. Let's dive right in. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Choose Your Teachers Wisely, Rethinking Education. For Kiyosaki, this whole unlearning curve actually started way back at age 7 in Sunday school. When asked why the wise men in the Bible were considered wise, his 7-year-old logic was incredibly simple. They had gold.
To him, the wise men were literally just rich men. It was his very first realization that he needed to carefully control exactly who he was taking advice from. And this brings us to the core conflict of his early life. On one side, we have his biological father, his poor dad. This guy was highly educated, had a Stanford PhD, and pushed the classic traditional path. Go to school, get a good job, save your money. But on the other side was his best friend's father, his rich dad. He lacked that formal education, but had this immense, real-world financial literacy. Kiyosaki points out that the space between your right and left ear, your brain, is your single greatest asset. You absolutely must control who fills it, and he purposely chose the teacher on the right.
Because of this, Kiyosaki is notoriously blunt when it comes to traditional academics. In his words, PhD actually stands for poor, helpless, and desperate. Ouch, right? It's incredibly harsh, but you have to understand it stems from a deeply personal memory. He vividly recalls watching his mother crying over bank statements, watching the red ink just keep growing, while his highly credentialed father struggled to make ends meet. To Kiyosaki, relying on a secure job means you're desperate, no matter how many degrees are hanging on your wall. Now, this leads into some of his more politically charged observations. From Kiyosaki's perspective, the traditional education system is fundamentally broken because it's run by employees who are just seeking a pension rather than actual wealth creators. He notes instances where academic institutions actively pushed back against his teachings, like a group of 39 professors at Arizona State University who allegedly threatened students over his concept. He even goes as far as viewing massive organizations like the NEA as labor unions driven by Marxist ideals that intentionally suppress independent financial thinking. Which brings us to our next major pillar. Section 2, The New Rules of Money, History of the Dollar. So picture this, it's 1965. Kiyosaki is 18 years old, and he's experiencing a massive economic principle called Gresham's Law in real time. Gresham's Law basically states that when bad, or fake money enters an economy, the real money goes into hiding. Working as a golf caddy, a young Kiyosaki noticed the pure silver in his coins was suddenly being swapped out for cheap copper. So he started hoarding all the older, pure silver half-dollars he could find. But the irony? He came home one day to find his mother had spent his entire hidden stash of silver, calling it dirty old money. She had absolutely no idea about the inherent value she had just handed over to the grocery store.
Understanding this historical shift is absolutely crucial to getting Kiyosaki's mindset. In 1964, coins had real silver. By 1965, the cheap copper entered the chat. But the ultimate game changer happened in 1971 when President Nixon took the US dollar completely off the gold standard. In Kiyosaki's eyes, 1971 was the exact moment the US dollar officially became dead. It became fiat. It became what he calls fake money. And it profoundly changed the rules of wealth forever.
And this realization births one of his most famous in-your-face catchphrases: savers are losers. Think about it from his perspective. If the currency is totally untethered from gold and is constantly being devalued by inflation, then working your entire life just to stockpile that currency in a basic savings account is literally a failing strategy. Why on earth would you save something that the government can just print endlessly?
So if saving money is out, what's the alternative? Let's move to Section 3, Cash Flow Over Everything, the Real Estate Formula.
When his book first dropped, he was absolutely crucified for posing this exact question. For decades, everyone had been spoon-fed the idea that their primary home was their single biggest asset. But Kiyosaki completely disrupted that cozy narrative. To him, true assets are defined by one very specific, very ruthless metric. And that metric is cash flow. It's simply the net amount of cold, hard cash moving into your pocket every single month. It has nothing to do with crossing your fingers and hoping the property goes up in value over the next 10 years. In fact, he explicitly warns people against listening to real estate agents who promise you'll make it up later on a property that's bleeding money today. His rule is absolute. If a property doesn't put money in your pocket on day one, do not buy it. Now, to really visualize the scale of his success using this exact formula, take a look at this number. Today, Robert Kiyosaki owns roughly 15,000 rental properties. Let that sink in. That is an astonishing, massive portfolio built entirely on the single principle of accumulating cash-flowing assets. Let's do some quick math on that just to put it into perspective. If you take those 15,000 properties, and let's be super conservative, and say they net him just $200 a month each in cash flow, that equals $3 million every single month. As he quickly points out, that is a figure even the most dedicated, highly educated school teachers simply can't ever match on a standard salary.
But here's the crazy part. Where do you think he learned this multi-million-dollar strategy? He learned it at 10 years old, sitting across a card table from his rich dad, playing Monopoly. The blueprint is brilliantly simple. Buy 4 greenhouses. Use tax laws like a 1031 exchange to your advantage. Roll them into one red hotel. He argues that playing that simple childhood board game taught him infinitely more about building actual wealth than sitting in any stuffy university lecture ever could.
Which segues perfectly into Section 4. The value of hard knocks, failing fast.
Because knowing the rules is one thing, but execution is a whole different beast. As the famous educator Maria Montessori said, what the hand does, the mind remembers. Think of it this way. You can sit in a lecture hall and listen to Tiger Woods explain the perfect golf swing all day long, but until your hands actually grip the club and you shank a terrible shot into the woods yourself, you haven't really learned a thing. This leads to an incredibly counterintuitive piece of advice. Early in his career, Kiyosaki was failing miserably as a salesman at Xerox. He called his rich dad, fully ready to quit, and his rich dad's response, "If you're gonna fail, step up your failure rate." So Kiyosaki literally spent his evenings dialing a nonprofit charity 30 times a night, purely to get rejected over and over again until his fear of failure completely disappeared. Through all that intense trial and error, he narrowed down 4 essential, non-negotiable skills you need to escape the corporate rat race. Number 1, you have to know how to sell. Number 2, you have to understand how to use debt as leverage. Number 3, you have to be able to raise capital. But the most important one? Number 4, you have to maintain your integrity and always be willing to stand back up after taking a massive hit. Because, make no mistake, the hits will definitely come. He recounts this devastating story from when his first major business was going under. His poor dad actually mortgaged his own house to lend him $100,000 to save the company. Kiyosaki took that massive lifeline, handed the check to his accountant, a guy named Stanley, and Stanley immediately cashed it and vanished, just completely gone. It was a brutal $100,000 lesson in trusting the wrong person. It cost his father dearly, and it forced Kiyosaki to learn ultimate resilience the hard way. Falling down is inevitable. Standing back up is a choice.
And that painful lesson brings us to our 5th and final section. Business is a team sport. Finding your wingmen.
To really grasp Kiyosaki's boardroom strategies, you have to look back at his intense combat experience as a U.S. Marine helicopter pilot in Vietnam. In that environment, you survive based entirely on the skill and the trust of your wingmen, period. He translates this into a fantastic sports metaphor for the business world. He compares polite, rule-bound, gentle business tactics to a game of soccer. But Kiyosaki, he's a rugby player. He wants hardcore, direct, rough partners. He actively chooses to partner with fellow rugby players, guys like his real estate partner Ken McRoy or Donald Trump, because he values brutal, unfiltered honesty way more than polite pleasantries. You have to play the game with people who play your sport.
And he actually extends this whole rugby worldview into some pretty bold societal critiques too. For instance, he argues that modern men generally lack the grit of past generations, and he points to current military recruitment struggles as evidence of that shift. Furthermore, when looking at modern dating dynamics, he objectively observes that women naturally practice hypergamy, meaning they seek partners with higher status or income. To him, this just means young men today must aggressively step up their game in every single aspect of life if they actually want to succeed. Which leads us to a really fascinating contradiction he likes to point out. In the traditional school system, if you don't know an answer and you look over and ask someone else for help, you're immediately punished for cheating. But out in the wild, real world of business,
Collaborating with the absolute smartest attorneys and the most brilliant CPAs isn't cheating. It is literally survival. True wealth is built by assembling the smartest team possible, not by trying to take the test all by yourself.
And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway for today. What are you doing today that your hands will actually remember? Or are you just sitting back listening to another lecture? Kiyosaki's entire philosophy demands action. Whether it's playing his cash flow board game to simulate real-world accounting, or just getting out there and making your own messy mistakes, you have to step off the sidelines and onto the field. So the next time you look at a bank statement, you got to ask yourself, whose rules are you really playing by? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I'll see you on the next one.